18 players, fans of the football. We're about to be talking the Minnesota Vikings, and this is a team to me, Bob, that was fun to watch for all the same reasons that I believe the Chargers are fun to watch. They're going to keep in games, but they always have the propensity of blowing a lead. Now, last year, they stayed in them, and they won basically every short game they had until the playoff game when it's like they forgot that they had people who are saying – is the number one fantasy safest pick in the draft in J. Jeff. They forgot to give him the ball the entire fourth quarter. Like, what are you doing? So I look at the offseason that the Vikings had with the backdrop that they won a lot of close games. With winning close games comes a lot of confidence. And they clearly are in a team that was in transition last year, but won. And it's hard to project that when we go to last year and saying a rookie head coach is going to win a lot of close games because it doesn't normally happen. But that is a great testament to a young head coach. Forgetting you at J. Jeff is almost an unexcusable sin, but that's what happened. And when we look at what this team has come to, they really did go through a transitionary period, at least they're about to. One of the faces of their team, Cook, they're basically phasing out. They brought Mattison back in and saying, we're going to give you a chance to be a guy. They let old man Thielen walk out the door. And what do? They're saying, we're going to bring in a rookie. We're going to think that Addison's going to be able to step up, give a young pairing next to J. Jeff and see what we can do. And on paper, when we look at their draft, at least by the ESPN grades, with the exception of Addison, not a single one of these players are rated above a 50. Now, obviously, the drafts, we're projecting about the work ethic of 22-year-olds, so it's not always an exact science. But as far as where they're at right now, that does tend to be pretty accurate. It's the potential column that can get messed up. So when I look at this team overall, their defense was the reason that they couldn't put teams away in a decisive Kansas City style. Teams came back against Minnesota because they couldn't score. And one of the best games of the regular season last year was one of those early Saturday, like a nooner games, whenever they were losing by 1 billion to the Colts and then came back in it. It's one of the best games of the year. And you don't get there, though, if you're not getting ripped apart by the Colts. Kind of a thing. So, but we do see the inverse of the Chargers. They got the job done. Obviously, the Chargers didn't. So I look at this team overall, Bob, very fun watch. I love watching Minnesota. But when I look at this, do I want to put a big wager on them winning the division in confidence? No. Do I think they're the most talented team in the division? Only because of J. Jeff, and I know their starting quarterback is at least the best quarterback in the division, especially at 1 o'clock. So when I look at all of this, it really comes down to I want to love the Vikings a lot more, but I'm scared to. And I get that I just sounded like a 19-year-old girl, but that's where I'm at with the Minnesota Vikings.
So here's a very important distinction to make about the Minnesota Vikings last year and the Minnesota Vikings this year. They went out and they got Brian Flores as the defensive coordinator for the team. Brian Flores is gold with everything he has touched, from the Miami Dolphins to the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, and now he's with Minnesota. Speaking about coaching changes, I want to revisit something that we didn't mention in a previous video about the Miami Dolphins. Even though we both don't have confidence in the Miami Dolphins, they did also make a shift in head coaching, and they picked up Vic Fangio, who has been known as a better defensive coach. But the reason I bring this up, not only because Brian Flores has a connection to Miami, but because when we take a look at Brian Flores, I believe he is a much better defensive coach than Fangio. And therefore, the sum of the parts on this team do not have to be as good as the sum of the parts on a Miami team. That Miami went out there and got Jalen Ramsey. They have a lot of pieces. Bradley Chubb. That defense should be good.
It won't be.
This defense, we aren't expecting to block or to knock our lights out. We are not expecting these players to do much more than stop what they need to stop. But when we look at a defense, that's logistically all we want them to do. And with Brian Flores scheming, he's going to most likely be able to bring out the best in even the average players. And we said it time and time again. Good coaches make bad players good, oftentimes, and good players great. Great coaches do that to a higher degree. And I'm not saying they're going to be great all the time. I'm not saying a bad player is going to be good all the time. But you are going to see them show flashes that when another
they will be aggressive all the time, though.
Right.
That's a Flores staple.
And now this is the point to make about Minnesota. Is Minnesota last year, if you would have flip-flopped their one-win games, they would have been worse than Houston. Their record would have been, I believe, at one point in time, it would have been the last in the league in terms of one-win games. If those wins would have went the opposite direction.
Well, that's a testament to their head coach.
That's a testament to their coach, and that also is a defining characteristic of their team last year, is that when we look at do these players and does this team overcome adversity? And there are a lot of examples last year where the Minnesota Vikings overcame adversity due in part to their poor defensive coaching. And a lot of the times you had to make up for things. Well, this year they went out and got Marcus Davenport. They got rid of Zadarius Smith, who wanted out anyway. They got rid of Patrick Peterson, but, okay, it is what it is. Patrick Peterson's on the other side of his career at this point in time. He's still a good player, but, he's not what we noticed that he was when he was down in Arizona. When you look at the pieces, they got rid of Eric Kendricks and they're replacing him with somebody else. The sum of the parts on paper don't look exceptional. But I think in this division in particular, that you don't have to be exceptional in any one department, because all of these teams that we're talking about, we want them to be better than what they are, but there's just something about each team, and it's a little quirk that every year you're like, okay, Kirk Cousins at 1:00, best quarterback. 3:00, forget about it. Prime time, ain't no chance. You have these quirks about all of these teams, and I think Minnesota Vikings is a good example of that. Last year, I pegged the Minnesota Vikings as winning this division. Obviously, that happened.
You were right.
And, when you look at what the team does well, they do passing really well, and there's no exception to that. And I don't think this year that's going to fall off, because Thielen wasn't the player that he was in the past last year.
No.
And when you look, and you've got Jefferson, you've got Hawkinson, which was an amazing piece to add. You have up-and-comer in KJ Osborne. You had a guy who was showing out a little bit in the playoff game with Naylor. And then you're also adding Jordan Addison. The question is, are you going to continue to keep Kirk Cousins upright to make these decisions and stay in the pocket? And is Alexander Mattison the guy, as you said he could be? Those are the question marks for the Minnesota Vikings. I have no doubt that this defense is going to be better, because they can't be any worse than they were last year. It is just not statistically possible for them to do as bad as they did last year at keeping leads, or as bad in the red zone as they did, or as bad as anything with Brian Flores as the helm. If Brian Flores is the guy who we think he is, who we've seen him to be, this team is going to take a jump up. The question mark is, with the divisions that they play and the teams that they play, are they going to be able to get to the same level as they were last year in terms of win totals? I mean, that game against the Buffalo Bills towards the tail end of the season was, I would say, that was the most exciting ending to a game that I've ever seen, not in college and not a playoff game. And so when you take a look at the Minnesota Vikings, you ask yourselves, can they get back to the division leader that they were last year? Absolutely. Minnesota and Detroit, I think, have your best chances to win this division. Do I think that they're going to accumulate as many wins as they did last year? No. Do I think they're going to be a better team than they were last year? Yes. But the only reason I don't think they're accumulating those wins is because they play a Denver team who I think who's going to outcoach them. I think they're going to play Kansas City, who's going to also outcoach them.
Coach Mose.
And I think when they play the Chargers, they might hit the Chargers on a good day. And the Chargers and the Minnesota Vikings, to me,
that might be the hardest game ever to bet.
They're almost exactly.
When do they play the Chargers?
Can they?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Can they defeat all the teams in the South? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's a guaranteed 4 wins right there. And that's writing off the Saints. But when we get to the Saints, we'll talk about them. But I honestly think that this team is going to beat all 4 teams in the NFC South. I think they may only beat 1 team from the AFC West. And then I think they're going to split, like you said, with Detroit and Green Bay because for some reason they have issues with that. And I think they're going to beat Chicago. So that comes down then. Can they then beat those other 3 teams that they face? They face the Cowboys, I bet.
Well, they place the second place schedule, so they play, or the first place schedule. So they face the Eagles.
So they face the Eagles.
The East. They face the winner of the West, which was the Niners.
They ain't going to win that game. Well, they might win that game.
Well, they got the Niners, and then they play the winner of the AFC North, the Cincinnati Bengals.
All right. So you look at that. Out of all of those teams, that sounds.
That's their like 3 spread games.
That sounds like one more win against San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So you look 4, and then you split, go 4-2. That's 8. You take a game out of the AFC West. That's 9, and then you take another game from those 3 randos. That's 10. So you're looking at a 9 to 10 win team.
Basically the same spot Detroit was when we're having this conversation.
If this shakes down in the way that we think, barring injuries across the league, even though you can't do that because they're going to happen, you have a team now that is going to play for this division lead with the Detroit Lions, potentially.
I think that's true. Like I said, it's hard to diminish what Flores can bring to the table. Flores has always made defenses better. And people can look at what he did with Pittsburgh and go, well, as soon as their star went out, they couldn't do anything.
Oh, but the Steelers' defense is not good.
He turned a 3rd-round draft pick into having the 2nd most sacks in the league.
Yeah, exactly.
So there is talent from Flores that is amazing. And we saw how bad Miami got as soon as he left. I mean, that's their defense couldn't stop anyone when push came to shove. So the thing that I look at the Vikings and what they're missing, there's 2 things really that I wish that they had that they don't. I wish they had a legitimate pass rusher. I believe Flores will make one of those. I just do. The other thing I wish they had that they absolutely don't, in fact, they're actually about to create this problem. I'm assuming they're cutting Dalvin Cook. They don't have a number 2 running back. And that's a concern for me for a team that says, hey, we want to throw the ball to get the lead and then run it out. Well, you need to have a guy who can do it. And while Mattison, when he has been in single games by himself, has won me fantasy leagues, when Dalvin Cook has been out, I have hardware to show it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is he's not an everyday quarterback. He's a change of the pace. It's nice outside, so I'm going to ride my motorcycle instead of taking the car into work. That's what Mattison is. You can't be doing that every single day. And the only real addressing of running back position they've done was a 7th-round pick, which, oh, by the way, ESPN says was their 2nd best pick instead of overall value right now. But how many guys from Alabama A and B really end up turning it on from Birmingham?
I want to shake this down for you because this is how FanDuel is looking at these Super Bowl odds, and we know Super Bowl odds are really crazy sometimes. Kansas City is plus 600, Philly's at plus 850.
Makes sense.
We have the Detroit Lions at plus 2,200. The next one is the Green Bay Packers at 4,000. And then the Minnesota Vikings at 4,000 as well.
Oh, that's disrespectful to the I'd more likely take that bet than the win the division bet. And the reason's obviously the juice, because they are not half as likely to. You said Detroit was 21, right? And they were 4,000?
22.
All right. So that's basically saying that you're half as likely as Detroit to win it when I think they're equal. So therefore, just simple odds math says that the Minnesota one's a good bet. Now, and also we're going to be covering Green Bay tomorrow. They have a lot of problems in Green Bay world.
So if we go to the division, however, and this is where it gets a little bit spicy, is Detroit's at plus 145 to win the division. Minnesota's at plus 310 to win the division, and the Packers and the Bears are tied at plus 350. That's a
lot of Detroit love.
Really weird. That's a really weird thing, though, is that the Packers are plus 4,000 to win the Super Bowl, but they're only plus 350 to win their division. So that must mean that they think that they're going to sneak in on a wild card spot. And
it means is a lot of Packers fans overbet their teams, and that's why their odds are bad. Just like the Steelers and the Cowboys.
I mean, if I'm looking at this here, I think a good bet would be either the Lions or the Vikings, and to put a hundo down on each and see how it shakes down.
You give me 3.5 to win the division. Like I said, the odds are why I would take that. If it were straight up both paying out the same amount, I wouldn't want to touch this. Again, I'm not writing Minnesota off at all.
No, by no means. I think
you either know how to win close games or you don't. And this team showed that they had. And this league is designed to put you in close games.
Yeah, and I think
that's an edge that you can't fight.
I think in close games there's bound to be a regression to some degree, and that's why I'm surmising that even with an improvement on coordinators, I'm assuming that a backslide a little bit will happen in certain games, and you might get knocked off by teams you're not supposed to lose to. But I wouldn't be surprised, like I said, if the Vikings have 11 wins, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they have 9 wins. And at that point in time, you're fighting potentially with Detroit. Yeah, this division is going to be really messy. And like I said before, the wild cards in this division for each team make it messy.
Yeah, I agree. I am excited for the Vikings here. Like I said, I like watching them play. And I think it's going to be fun. I hope that they get the same entertaining brand this year as they did last year. It'd be good.